Today's design principle that we will be talking about is emphasis. Emphasis is where we want the eye to go, or what we want to be seen first. We also call that the focal point. A simple rule for placement, or where the focal point should be, is that you take your composition and you divide it into thirds, horizontally and vertically, and then generally the focal point will be in one of these intersections. That's a very easy rule. You can take this a little further and also divide your paper into fourths, and do the focal point here in one of these corners. There are a lot of paintings that have the focal point in other areas, but one thing that I do know for sure is that we don't love to put the focal point right in the middle. This composition lends itself to a lot more interesting work. So when you're starting out, it's a good idea to use this rule. We call it the rule of thirds. Now, certain things to our human eye will pop out and be emphasized just naturally because that's what we notice. So faces. If you notice advertisements, pay attention to advertisements. Go through a magazine and look at what they put on the advertisement, or even billboards. What do they put on the billboards? And you will notice these things. Faces stand out, texts. So words, that means words. Certain colors also stand out, which red, which is why they make stop signs red, because they really want you to notice and stop. And they write stop on the stop sign. Another thing that's going to stand out the most is whatever is the biggest thing on the paper. So using size to your advantage. And the last thing are icons. So that can be quick pictures of things that are easily recognizable. For example, that's why name brand items have their name, but they also have a logo associated with the brand. Now, it's not just important the object or the placement of the object. If you want something to stand out, it's also just as important what you put next to the object. So, one of the most popular ways to make contrast work to your benefit is using complementary colors. So, I'm taking this green here and I'm going to surround it by the color red, and that will make your eye drawn to that area. Another contrast that's very common to use is value contrast. So where your focal point is, that's where the lightest areas and the darkest areas will be. So think white and black. If you have a bright white object with black near it, that is definitely going to stand out. bullseye or targets. So if you want something to stand out, you can circle it. Another tool that artists use to create emphasis is line direction. So notice this flower and then the stem going up, there's a line coming down. So we notice it. I could also do lines in the background that would all point to that. So it leads your eye in to look at the flower. I'm basically pointing arrows at it, saying, look here. Go through and look at some artworks that you like that famous artists have done and notice how they use line to direct your eye movement. Try to find what they want you to look at, the focal point, and then notice what kind of contrast they use and how they use line to direct your eye. And also notice where they place the focal point. What is the focal point? All right, so the goal for this warm-up is to use these rules to create emphasis. So you can either just pick the same thing that I pick, or you can do your own thing, but I'm just going to do a star because a star is like an icon. It's a symbol. So I'm going to divide this space. I'm actually going to use I'll use the rule of thirds. Then I'm going to pick a corner where I want my star to be. Actually, I think I'm going to do a moon, but it's still a symbol. And then I'm going to use contrast to make the moon stand out, and I'm going to use lines to make the moon stand out. So you decide what you want to do for this, but the whole goal is to get it to stand out. That's really easy where it's six inches long. I always thought they were, these are 4 by 6. This whole time I thought I was using 5 by 7. When I divide my artwork into thirds, I actually rarely ever actually measure it out. I just kind of eyeball it. But today I'm being exact. Alright, so I'm going to make my moon pretty big too because size matters. So here's some lines, like a shooting star. I'm even kind of pointing my star lines in that direction. Red's a very eye-catching color, but so is yellow. So I'm going to do it yellow. And like I said, I could outline it like the bullseye factor. So I have one dominant focal point, but I will probably, these ones are going to make my eye move around the page a little bit. So having a subordinate focal point is a good idea. So they're smaller, so they won't stand out as much as the moon, but I am going to do this one white so that it contrasts. This one's going to be a really light blue. The opposite of yellow is violet, so I'm going to do it very dark because this is light, but I'm also going to put some violet in there in the color. So once again, we divided the space into the rule of thirds. We picked a corner to put the focal point. I made the focal point the largest. It's also a pretty easy icon to, it's very familiar. The moon is just familiar. I used contrast by making it the lightest, and around it I made the darkest color, but I also made contrast because it's textured and it's complementary color scheme with the yellow and then the purple around it, so it's making it pop out. And it is definitely outlined. Maybe outlined isn't the right word, but it is surrounded. And then I used line to direct you, even using the star edges back to the moon. So for this next project, we are going to find a photo that we like, and hopefully you guys have started collecting photo references. And then we're going to use the viewfinder that we made, and we're going to try and find a little area to paint. I think this is really fun as an abstract design. Who would ever guess that it's sponges? But for this one, I don't think that I'm going to use, I don't want it to be abstract necessarily. So I am loving this page here with the flowers. I feel like it would be such an easy focal point. The center of flowers makes such an easy focal point because it's a circle and it's generally high contrast. So I think I might go with this page here that I found and do one of these flowers on my page. I also have some real flowers in my studio that I would like to work with, and I could use my viewfinder and or I can take pictures with my camera and maybe pick some pictures from that. So even though I don't really want the perfume bottles in my picture, but I don't have to draw those, I can use my imagination and fill in the gaps. I like the size of this one better. I like the details better. I don't love the yellow background, so I definitely changed that. This one I like the contrast better, the red against the background, but it's too small. I want it to fill it the whole space, but I don't know if I want to do 2 flowers because I feel like that where we're trying to emphasize something in the picture, I kind of wanted to just stick with one dominant focal point. So I think I'm going to do this one. Now I'm deciding, do I want the focal point to be in this corner, that corner, or that corner? My favorite pictures that Georgia O'Keeffe does are her flowers. And I recently read a quote that she said that people are so busy. This isn't an exact quote, but I'm just kind of summarizing it. That they don't notice things, and so she was going to paint these beautiful large flowers so they would have to notice them. So this is kind of going to be like that. So here's my note card, and if I have any thoughts on emphasis, I'm going to write them on my note card. So I have this taped on here, and now I'm going to, and I have my paper taped down, I'm going to start drawing the picture in. Like I said, I don't usually measure out my lines. I kind of just eyeball it. Drawing makes you nervous. Try to, well, first start with your focal point and then build out from there. And then just try to notice either the big shapes or do it like a line drawing, and even though there's a lot of distortion in that, just do a continuous line drawing and maybe don't even look at your paper. So then you know it's going to be distorted, but that's okay. It'll be a very interesting picture. The other thing I like about drawing flowers, though, is no one's going to be like, that petal wasn't like that, because they're never going to see your photo reference. that you use, you're not going to stick the photo reference right next to the final picture. And so flowers are really easy to draw. They're very forgiving. I think on my card I'm going to measure halfway and then draw the guidelines on my card. It just, I think that will be kind of interesting to see where I end up putting my focal point. I kind of have the outline drawn out here. Now I'm going to decide what medium I want to use. I'm going to start out with watercolor, and then I'm actually probably going to do some acrylic over the top of it. So, this is yellow, and there's some reds or peach colors in there too. And so I'm going to decide, I've already decided I don't want to do yellow on the background color, but I don't know, I don't necessarily need it to be like always complementary colors, where, so if I wanted it complementary I would do purple, but I don't really want to do that. So sometimes I'll draw out an actually a lot of times I will decide my color palette ahead of time. Just kind of get an idea of what colors work together. So I'm gonna do that before I start this piece. Okay, so I have a little note card, and so that I don't paint on my picture, which I do quite often, I'm gonna put that out there. And I'm going to test out some colors and see what I want to go together. So my yellows on this palette. I'm going to start out with kind of thinking, I keep looking over at the screen here. incorporate that green in there. I don't know. I still don't know what the background color. My go-to colors I always add this color. It's my favorite color. But I probably overuse it too, so. But it's so pretty. Okay. I think I've got it pretty figured out here. So I have them laid out, but I want you to know that it is really important to mix colors together and let them interact with each other and not just use the colors straight out of the bottle or the palette. So don't be afraid to let these colors mix together. But I kind of have a good idea of a starting point. So now I'm going to begin. I'm going to use my biggest paintbrush first and start to block in the shapes and the colors. And then I will do the shadows and then I'll do the details. So that's kind of the process that we're going to go through here. All right, honestly, I'm feeling a little squished because I'm trying to put everything in there that I'm using into my screen. So it's a little tight, but we'll just make do with what we have. Hopefully you can see it well enough. So because I want my focal point to be the lightest and darkest area, I'm actually going to leave the focal point white. So I'm just putting clean water around that focal point, and for a while I'm just going to let it stay the white of the paper. So this is the area where the light is hitting, so I'm going to leave that with the brighter yellows, and where it's more shadowed I'm using my darker, less clean yellow ochre. It's a more earthy color. I'm keeping this very wet because at this point I really don't want a lot of hard edges, and I'm being really loose. And I decided that I'm going to do
Hi, Mom.
Hi. What you doing?
Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Making stuff. And I'm following. I feel artsy fartsy.
Oh.
So I have sticks and I have paper. And I have scissors and I have glue. I have pencils and I have markers.
Cool.
But I don't know if I want to do the craft sticks or draw.
Why not both?
Draw something. Then which one should I do first?
That is a good
Ooh,
question.
I have a good idea. You could make an easel with the craft sticks, then draw on the easel. But I already have a thing to draw on. Or you can make it anything. Or you could like make a really fancy picture and then make like a stand. Now I'm making bridge. Those are some good ideas.
All right, so I had to wait for it to dry. Now I'm going to do the next layer, and so I've switched my brush to a smaller brush now. And I'm going to start going in and popping out some of these shadows. So here I've mixed a yellow ochre with a sienna. I'm taking a clean brush and I'm drying it off, and then I'm just going to kind of blend this line here so that I don't have all hard edges. I'm just kind of going along the center of this flower. So in my mind, I'm thinking this is still my focal area. This is the emphasis. And I'm going to try and figure out how to do that the best way possible. So it's already going to be my darkest area. But I also have these lines that come from the center and they point into it, and it's circular. So I'm trying to decide if I want to do those with a black Sharpie marker and make it very obvious, but also if I do that, it's not going to look, it's going to start going more towards more abstraction. And so I have to decide what style am I going for in this picture. Do I want it to be more of a graphic design statement, or do I want it to be more realistic? Honestly, I always in my pieces go to more towards the graphic design and less realistic, because I just think it's a lot more fun when you can get away from trying to make it look exactly like the picture. I just find that is very limiting, and it makes the work a lot more tight when you're trying to make it look like something, and it just makes it harder to make it look like your own. So I think I just convinced myself to use the Sharpie. My sister and I were talking the other day about what our core values are in life. There was a Darren Daly that said that you can figure out your core values by looking at your calendar and by looking at what you spend your money on. So looking at your bank statements or maybe your Amazon shopping cart. And I don't know if this is a bad thing or a good thing, but I like to have fun and I don't like to have restrictions. So that's probably another reason why I don't like to just follow along with the picture. Is enjoying life is important to me. It's a priority. So maybe that's one thing that hopefully you'll notice in my artwork. So maybe identifying your core values or looking at the way that you create art will tell you something about yourself too. So I'm just looking at the darkest places here in these pictures. I'm just finding the shadows and I'm putting them in, building up layers. And I'm really being loose with this. I'm holding the end of the brush. So I put this line in, and that is a very bright line, and it's going to make your eyes go up there, and that's not exactly what I want. So I can either dull that line down, or I can add more of it closer to my focal area so that my eye is still traveling around the piece. I'm still going to dull that down a little bit though, because it is really screaming to me. So I can do that a couple different ways. I can either add a glaze on top of it, or I can just take my paintbrush and lighten the area, or I can take a paper towel and remove some of the color. I hate removing the color though, because I like my artwork to be colorful. So, and watercolor always dries a little bit lighter than what you put on, so I don't like to remove color very often. Once again, I'm just coming with a clean brush and I'm making it so that there's not like a hard line here. So I'm going to have to wait till this layer dries. And then I'm going to come back in and add some details. Okay, so as I'm waiting for this to dry, I'm going to take a step back, and everything that we are focusing on in this lesson is the focal point. So I like how these lines are drawing our eye into that focal point. I'm going to make this the lightest and the darkest, but that will come when I move on to my smallest paintbrush. I'm also going to draw in those lines. So that is also going to make us focus here. So the most detailed place is definitely going to be there also. But I can also step back and I can see if there's anything that's distracting or going to compete for that attention. So this area was really harsh, so I came in and I softened that up while it's still wet. But other than that, I'm pretty comfortable with this so far. I don't love the background yet. And I think part of that is all of the piece has a lot of texture and there's no place for me to rest my eyes. So I think I'm gonna have to come back in here and smooth this out more. I'm also going to take some of this background and I'm going to put the colors into the focal point, because I feel like the color's so different here that I need to draw it back into this area. So I'm gonna let it dry and then come back and finish. Okay, there are a few areas that are still wet, but I'm going to just be careful not to drag my hand into them. I am holding this Sharpie marker from the end. I don't want it to get, I want to stay loose here. So as I looked at this picture, these lines just look like they're layering or overlapping. So that's kind of just how I drew them. I'm not looking at the picture trying to get the exact lines. I'm just trying to make it feel like it feels to me, if that makes sense. That would give me a lot of anxiety if I tried to copy this exactly like the picture. I would be a mess. It would not be fun to me. So I'm just trying to get more of what it feels like to me rather than what I actually can see. That is just my own personal philosophy. That doesn't mean that it's right for you. So if the pleasure that you find and the enjoyment that you find is in getting every detail just right, go for it. That's just fine. Okay, so I feel like this is definitely successful in drawing my eye in. It is definitely the focal point, but now I have to decide if I want to add a few more black lines on the rest of the flower for unity or continuity, and I am going to, but not very many. So I'm gonna, there's a lot here, and so now I'm gonna fade out and do just a few little lines on the edges of the petals. But because it's still wet on the edges, I'm not gonna do it yet because it will ruin my marker. So while I'm waiting for that, I'm gonna come in with my smallest paintbrush and I'm gonna start adding some details into this middle area. But I'm kind of using this acrylic more like a watercolor. I'm thinning it out so that it's really translucent. So I'm getting the color, but it's not covering up my lines too much. This one's easy to do because it's pretty transparent anyways. The blue might be a little harder when I add that. I'm gonna have to be a little more careful. I'm just adding this blue where I see the blue in the picture. A lot of times I will try not to use the same color in the shadow side as I did on the highlight side, but then I break rules sometimes. So I do find that a little bit too distracting though, so I'm gonna go back in and lighten it up. And actually, I think I'm actually even gonna just use some watercolor here and change the blue to a different color blue. It's so weird. This marker's permanent, but it's almost still wet, so it's kind of bleeding into the colors, which I don't mind. I am okay with that, but it's just kind of weird. I guess I didn't let it dry quite enough. Okay, so another thing I like to do with my focal area is I like to add a color that I haven't added anywhere else. So here comes the purple. I don't feel like that is dark enough yet. This is, remember, this is where I want the darkest darks to be. So I'm going to come in again with another layer. My small paintbrush here. Here I'm just taking the same red color and darkening some of the details. usually just kind of finish off the piece at the focal point and add a couple highlights. This also provides the top texture, the highest texture of the piece when you do this, when you do the last area of the focal point, which also makes the eye see that first. I'm just adding a few more details along some of these edges, just so that it doesn't go from detailed to single lines. So just a few details and then a few like branched out from that, but not too much, not to take away from the focal point. All right, I'm gonna take the tape off and see how it looks. Sometimes I take the tape off and it doesn't look quite complete, so I add a couple more details.